Meanwhile, Joe Biden pushing radical immigration policy as well. His immigration policy is pretty obvious. Open the borders and let everybody come. This has some pretty dire side effects, by the way. But even New York Times reporters at this point are acknowledging that migrants are showing up en masse on the southern border, specifically because of Joe Biden.
I was actually just at the border, and some of the families I spoke to who had recently arrived did say that another reason is the transition to a new administration. They perceive President Biden, who campaigned on a more compassionate approach to the border than his predecessor, as potentially being more lenient at the border.
So, yes, I mean, that's perfectly obvious. By the way, the unintended side effect of this is that, wait for it, Joe Biden is keeping kids in cages. Now, I'm old enough to remember, because I'm more than 3 years old. I'm old enough to remember when having to house kids in temporary detainment facilities was considered Nazi-esque, right? Donald Trump was a Nazi. This was Nazi Germany, America. Well, now we know that kids are being held in cages, literal cages. Okay, the New York Times reporting a surge in migrant children detained at border is straining shelters. Quote, the number of unaccompanied migrant children detained along the southern border has tripled in the last 2 weeks to more than 3,250, filling facilities akin to jails. I love how they say this, right? Facilities akin to jails. What might we call a facility akin to a jail? What is there some, could we look to the thesaurus, please? Facility akin to a jail. Oh, you're talking about kids in cages. That's what you mean. That's what you mean, New York Times. As the Biden administration struggles to find room for them in shelters, according to documents obtained by the New York Times. More than 1,360 of the children have been detained beyond the 72 hours permitted by law before a child must be transferred to a shelter, according to one of the documents dated March 8th. You mean we have over 1,000 children who are being held in cages in defiance of federal law because you don't have the resources? You know who else did this? Had a little mustache, spoke German. Yep. You know who I'm talking about. The figures highlight the growing pressure on President Biden to address the increased number of people trying to cross the border in the belief he will be more welcoming to them than former President Donald J. Trump was. Yes, even the New York Times is acknowledging that this is all about Joe Biden saying, we are going to let everybody in. When you tell everybody that you're going to let them in and just give them asylum and that you're going to release them into the interior, what the hell do you think is going to happen? These are radical policy shifts, guys. We're going back to the welfare policies of the 1960s. We're going back to the immigration policies, essentially, of amnesty, like full-scale amnesty. Come to the border and we will let you in. And we are going to gender policies that are so radical that they would have been beyond the radical feminists of the 1990s. That is where we have gone. And all of this is being done as a non-functional member of the upper echelon of American politics stumbles around into objects and chases after his dog naked. That is what we are as a society. That is what we have become. A non-sentient person is now running administration. He ain't running it, right? It runs itself. It runs itself because all we do every 4 years is just elect the team of administrators who are going to dictate our lives. Meanwhile, other transformational changes. The Democrats are pushing forward H.R. 1. We've discussed this on the program before. This is a radical shift to how voting is going to be done in the country. Now remember, according to the Democrats, there was no voter fraud and no voter irregularity in the last election cycle. It was the cleanest election in American history, according to Democrats. And that's why it resulted in a Joe Biden win, because it was such a clean election. Well, now, Democrats are claiming we need a massive overhaul of every voting system in the United States, which is weird, since if you guys are so concerned about voter fraud and irregularity, why exactly are you doing this? H.R. 1 is not merely a vote broadening procedure. H.R. 1 is a complete overthrow of the federalist structure with regard to voting, and it is an attempt to backfill American voting law so as to make it easier for people to commit voter fraud and irregularity. That's what H.R. 1 is. So, what is in H.R. 1? What is in this massive new voting bill that Democrats are pushing forward? According to National Review, it would be an understatement to describe H.R. 1 as a radical assault on American democracy, federalism, and free speech. It is actually several radical left-wing wish lists stuffed into a single 791-page sausage casing. It would override hundreds of state laws governing the orderly conduct of elections, federalize control of voting and elections to a degree without precedent in American history, end 2 centuries of state power to draw congressional districts, turn the Federal Elections Commission into a partisan weapon, and massively burden political speech against the government while offering government handouts to congressional campaigns and campus activists. Merely to describe the bill is to damn it, and describing it is a Herculean task in itself. States have long experience running elections. Different states have taken different approaches. The federal government traditionally intervened only to prevent serious abuses of voting rights. H.R. 1 would upend that balance for no good reason, wrecking carefully refined state regimes for securing the vote. It also throws out much of the work of federal election laws passed with extensive bipartisan support in 1993 and 2002. The first target is wiping out state laws that allow voters to be checked against a pre-existing list of registrations. H.R. 1 mandates states provide same-day registration and allow people to change their name and address on the rolls at the polling place on Election Day, then forbids states from treating their votes as provisional ballots that can be checked later, which is a recipe for massive voter fraud. It mandates online registration without adequate safeguards against hackers. It mandates automated registration of people who apply for unemployment, Medicaid, Obamacare, and college, or who are coming out of prison. Right, so basically, anybody who's government dependent is going to be automatically registered to vote, which you can see why Democrats are pushing this. The bill's authors expect this to register non-citizens. They create a safe harbor against prosecution of non-citizens who report they have been erroneously registered. State voter ID laws are banned. They're replaced simply by a sworn voter statement. The dramatic expansion of mail-in voting during COVID is enshrined permanently in federal law. States are banned from the most elementary security methods for mail-in ballots. They must provide a ballot to everyone without asking for ID and may not require notarization or witness to signatures. States are compelled to permit ballot harvesting so long as the harvesters are not paid per ballot. So Democrats can just pay per hour and you just go pick up a bunch of Democrat ballots. Curbside voting, ballot drop boxes, 15 days of early voting are mandated nationwide. The bill micromanages the location and hours of polling stations, early voting locations, and drop boxes. States must accept voter registrations from 16-year-olds, even though they can't vote before turning 18. The bill shifts the job of signing up young voters to the federal government, which will pay to teach 12th graders how to register, create a campus vote coordinator position on college campuses, and award grants to colleges for demonstrated excellence in registering students to vote. Restrictions on felon voting in federal elections are overridden. And H.R. 1 takes the drawing of congressional districts out of the hands of elected state legislatures who have done the job since the founding and turns them over to quote-unquote independent commissions. It also counts inmates as residents of their last address, even if they are serving a life sentence. And there are crackdowns on political speech. One provision could be read to bar corporations from political activity if they have a single foreign shareholder. New disclosure rules would treat huge amounts of speech and advertising as if they were campaign contributions. This would require donors to say the AARP, to be identified as supporters of any candidate if the AARP demands the candidate keep a promise to protect Social Security. 501c4s would be required to disclose their donors. I mean, it's a mess. It's a complete mess. And this is what's being pushed forward by the Biden administration. So moderate, so much unity. You can see it happening. Now, if you get the feeling that these folks just want to control your life in pretty much every way and then rig the system so that they always win elections through ballot harvesting and through unverified ballots and make it less trustworthy. Okay, remember, I am not one of the people who thought that voter fraud and irregularity decided the 2020 election. In fact, I spoke out against that idea. I didn't think the evidence was provided. I was willing to hear evidence if it was provided. There's not a lot of evidence provided. Okay? I'm not one of the people who is saying that I don't trust results of elections. I'm saying I will not trust the results of future elections if they are done under the auspices of this garbage bill. It's going to be very difficult to trust elections when you are literally just registering voters on the same day as they change their names and addresses, and those ballots are not counted as provisionals. Okay, that alone is enough to undermine voter integrity. Did you know that every like on this video creates one additional leftist tier? Don't ask me why. That's called science. To take advantage of this amazing opportunity, hit the like button.